What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're back. It's Lettermen Live, presented by Wendy's. You've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them, Andy? Have you had them covered in sauce? Because Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love, and they turn them up to 11, Andy. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, or if you're a real heat seeker, try the spicy ghost pepper, only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you, Andy, try the spicy ghost pepper. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs that you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's gotta be Wendy's, and that's at participating U.S. Wendy's. Of course, it's at participating U.S. Wendy's. Of course, that's Andy Backstrom on the other side of the screen, and of course, it's Spencer Holbrook. You see the logo up there next to Andy's nice little face. Lettermen Live, we're back after an off season of fun twists, turns, additions, subtractions to the Ohio State roster. We're going to do this every Thursday at 6:30. You're going to know that you're going to want to join us because we're going to break down the opponent. We're going to break down a lot of other things. We're going to have some fun breakdowns. We're going to have a lot of fun within the show. Maybe we'll do some picks at the end of each show. Maybe we'll pick Florida State, Georgia Tech at the end of this one. But Andy, it is great to be back hanging out on a live stream.
Yeah, Akron deep dive. Let's get into it now. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I'm really excited to get back to these live shows. I really enjoy it. Just a little back and forth with you, Spencer, and to get into this football season. It feels like the off season's taken forever, but it's also been so exciting. So I don't really know the balance between that, but it has been a long time since Ohio State has played its last football game in Arlington, in Jerry World, with that game that was so forgettable in the Cotton Bowl. Really feels like the last game was against Michigan last week in November. Now towards that Michigan game, November 30th for this season. But first, you start with Akron and a September slate that's honestly really favorable for Ohio State. And I'm sure we'll get into that today.
So that's what we're going to do today. So next week, we'll have the Akron deep dive. Andy's going to give you 15 things to know about Akron new starting quarterback Ben Finley. We're going to go full film breakdown on the Akron defense, the challenges that Ohio State faces. But this week, we're going to do a schedule breakdown, the whole slate, the whole kit and caboodle, as they say. We're going to break down some tougher games. We're going to break down some breakout projections. We're going to do some picks on what we think the schedule will look like. It should be fun, Andy, and I'm going to kick it off to you or with you here because this is the one that I love the most because we're an overreacting bunch. Ohio State fans overreact to everything. Ohio State media, we probably overreact to things as well. That's what we love about Ohio State fans. But we're going to do first the game that you're most likely to overreact to in a positive way in the first months of the season, and then we'll flip it and go to the game that we're most likely to overreact to in a negative way among those first four. Your choices for the positive direction: Akron, Western Michigan, Michigan State, and Marshall. You can pick the bye week, I guess, if you want, but that's kind of cheating. Which game do you think Ohio State fans, Ohio State in general, you and I here on Lettermen Live, Tim May, the 41-year vet, like all of us, which game are we most likely to overreact to in a positive way?
It's going to be Akron because they might hang 70 on the Zips. And, look, with Kyle McCord starting back in 2021 and that week 4 game when you had CJ Stroud, who was injured, they still won 59-7, and they could have put up more points. I think this Ohio State team will get back to its usual ways offensively, at least in week 1 against Akron, and hang a big number. I'm really not kidding with 70. I think that could be the number that we see week 1, and Will Howard will have a great day, prolific numbers. You'll have all 3 quarterbacks playing, Devin Brown as well as Julian Sayin, and I think that everyone will really play to the standard that you're expecting. And I just think that there will be sort of an overreaction of, okay, this is the team that we were expecting that's going to beat up everyone and leave no doubt, even to the point where you're winning by 63 or whatever. And I think that not that that's so much an overreaction that can't be this team throughout this season. Maybe it will be like 2019 where every week is just dominance. But I do think that there will be a natural regression to the mean, when you do play Michigan State in, East Lansing, when you play Oregon, obviously, in October 11th, but also when you play Iowa the week, before that as well. So I think there will be some kind of overreaction after week 1 just because of how dominant we'll be. And I think that'll be funny to watch, but also interesting to see what people's takes are.
For sure. I mean, here's the bottom line, Andy. Like, we are starving for college football. I'm going to sit down at 11:59 on Saturday night and watch 4 quarters of Hawaii Delaware State. Like, I've already warned my wife, I've warned people around me, like, hey, I'm going to be up till 3 a.m. because I'm going to watch Hawaii Delaware State. Like, should I? No. But will I? Yes. Ohio State is starving to play. They're starving to get back on the field. And so I think you're correct in this Akron thing. I'm going to go a different game, but just because we need, we're doing a show here, I've got another angle to take it. But like, when you are this hungry for live, real game action of football, and it's not just the NFL preseason anymore, it's like real pads pop and everything, you're definitely going to overreact. And like, you're going to see like Calvin Simpson Hunt have an interception in the fourth quarter and be like, oh, he should be starting. Like he's, like it's those kind of things that I love. And sometimes they end up being correct. Like Jermaine Matthews last year had the pick 6 against one of the directional Michigan schools, Western Kentucky. Yeah, one of the directional Kentuckys. And everybody's like, oh man, is he going to be a breakout freshman? And they were right, because he was. But that doesn't mean that they always come true. And so, it's one of those things where you're going to overreact, and your overreaction may be correct down the road. But you might overreact to, a 3-sack performance from one of the freshman defensive tackles, and then they don't play again the rest of the year. And then, your overreaction is probably wrong. I love that, because the first game of the year, I think you get a hall pass. You're allowed to overreact to that one in a positive way. I'm going to go to the Marshall game, though. And the reason I'm going to go to the Marshall game that we're going to overreact in a positive way is I think the first 2 games of the year, Ohio State fans and Ohio State in general will kind of feel out how everything's going to look with this incredible roster. It might include scoring 70 on Akron. It might include, shutting out Western Michigan. But you're going to get film from what you have through 2 games. You're going to get to watch it for a full week. You're going to get to regroup and make sure that everything is buttoned up for an important stretch heading into October. And I think once you get buttoned up, everyone's going to overreact in a positive way when they beat Marshall pretty badly. And so, after that first bye week, you get a chance to decompress and recover after 2 weeks of scrimmages, glorified scrimmages. I think that Marshall game gives Ohio State a good chance to flex again and enter the stretch of late September, early October on a good note. And I think that there's going to be a little bit of overreaction to whatever happens in that Marshall game.
Yeah, the last time they played Marshall was back in 2004, and they needed a Mike Nugent 54-yard field goal to win at the end. So that was a 24-21 game. I actually thought it'd be fun to do like a story to go back and talk to some guys that were part of that game, because, yeah, I mean, things have changed in 20 years, okay? Like, Ohio State should win that game. I agree with you. And I think that that's a good point, that after the bye week, you regroup and you should be better. I mean, coming off a bye, you should always honestly win the game. You have time to study and game plan for that specific opponent, and also get ready, as you said, for Big Ten play, which will open up the next week at Michigan State. So that's going to be an interesting game. I had fun looking back at that last matchup, because you never know. I mean, Marshall beat Notre Dame a couple of years ago, and there's always that team, from one of the Group of 5 conferences that pulls a stunner in the beginning of the season. It's not, I don't think it'll be close, but it's just fun because you do have to respect every one of these opponents. That's like Ryan Day said last year, when our good friend Clay Hall asked about the Hilltoppers, and at first considered them an FCS team, and Ryan Day reminded him that they are indeed FBS, and Clay said, my apologies to the Hilltoppers. And I think that's when you have to respect, all of these teams, because you never really know. But I agree with you. I think that could be a big showing for all the guys coming off the bye.
They did, Andy. They did play Marshall to open the year in 2010, but it was so forgettable that the 20-year anniversary is more worth talking about. I remember being a child and watching 45-7. I don't remember the Mike Nugent game, but I'm sure Ohio State fans still have like nightmares of like, please Nugent, save us. He's the most like prolific kicker in Ohio State history. 20 years later, if they need a Jaden Fielding field goal to beat this Marshall team, look, man, it's early in the year. I got the Phil Steele here. I've been looking at it. I'm reading Akron. Like, I'm a sicko. I'm reading Marshall. I'm reading Western Michigan. If they need a field goal to beat this Marshall team 20 years later, then maybe it's just something in the air every 20 years. Ohio State, don't schedule Marshall in 2044 if something goes awry in this 2024 matchup. Like, we can't have it happen again. Andy, I'm going back to you. What's the game we're going to overreact to in a negative way among these first four? Maybe it's the Marshall game. Maybe it is another field goal stunner.
No, I'm not going that direction. And this is a hard question because I think our natural inclination here is to say Iowa, and we're not including Iowa in this bracket of games that we're considering because, of course, Iowa is an AP preseason top 25 team. The defense has been legit. They've been top 5 in scoring defense in the Big Ten ever since 2015, consecutive years. So that's the easy answer. We're not going there, but just full disclosure, that's where I think I would go if we were including that game. I'm going to say Michigan State because that's the other Big Ten game in this slate. In the early season games before Oregon. And look, guys, I understand the scores recently against Michigan State have been ridiculous. I actually went back and looked at this. The last 7 meetings, 48-3 in 2017, 26-6 in 2018, 34-10 in 2019, 52-12 in 2020, 56-7 in 2021, 49-20 in 2022, and 38-3 in 2023. Look, Ohio State has had Michigan State's number, and I don't know if it's going to be any different. I'm not predicting this will be a close game. I will say, though, I have some faith in Jonathan Smith and the offense at Michigan State. I don't know how quickly they'll turn it around. I do think at some point they will. I do like that he brought over the quarterback of the future for him at Oregon State with Aiden Childs, pretty highly touted guy from the 2023 class. Maybe this offense finds some way to be successful at home in East Lansing and score 2, 3, maybe 4 touchdowns. And if that's the case, that would be alarming for this Ohio State defense that didn't really have that happen at all until the Michigan game last year. And so I think if something were to happen like that, there would be some overreaction about the defense. I think it would be correctable things. And again, I'm not predicting that to happen. I'm just saying that if it did, I do think that people would be kind of pressing the panic button a little bit going into an Iowa game where the defense is actually going to be good for Iowa. And if the offense for Michigan State had success, I don't know, maybe Iowa's offense could. So I think that's where I'm looking, just because I do think Jonathan Smith is one of the better offensive minds in college football. They do have the game at home. And at some point, Michigan State's got to put more resistance than they have in the last 7 years against Ohio State. So that's the game I'm picking. Not that I think it's going to necessarily go that way, but if it does, I think there will be some overreaction. And maybe not even overreaction, maybe honest, like realistic panic.
There are Ohio State fans across this great country that have scars, maybe literal in some cases, scars from Michigan State, whether it's 2013 and keeping Ohio State out of the BCS National Championship game by beating Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship game, and allowing that matchup of Florida State Auburn to happen instead of Ohio State Florida State, with Braxton Miller getting stopped on 4th and 1 in Indianapolis, whether it's 2015. Do we need to relive that one with Ohio State not handing the ball off to Zeke Elliott and Michigan State, Michael Geiger hitting a field goal? I'm sitting in B-Deck watching it go through, watching him do the windmill, and it's like, whoa, Ohio State just lost. How did this happen to this Michigan State team? Michigan State goes on to win the Big Ten and get shelled by Alabama in the playoff when that should have been Ohio State. 1998, the ultimate stunner, where Ohio State's the number 1 team in the country, Michigan State and Nick Saban march into Ohio Stadium and get a 28-24 win over the best team in the country. No, it was Nick Saban. Michigan State just does weird things to Ohio State when Ohio State is supposed to be ridiculously good. Even the 2019 matchup, when Ohio State won every single Big Ten game by double digits, it was not the easiest game for Ohio State. I think Ohio State won that game 34-10, if I'm not mistaken. But it wasn't like that was a complete blowout from the opening gun. Ohio State had to really compete in the first half of that game against Michigan State. And Michigan State wasn't that good in 2019. So, there are things that happen in Ohio State, Michigan State. I completely endorse your pick there, Andy. Oddly enough, I'm gonna go with Akron, man. I think Akron is bad enough. And this is not, I guess it is disparaging Akron. That's fine. I'm an Ohio grad, so I can disparage Akron. It's fine. I think Akron's really bad, like Mac bad. And so when they get first downs, there's going to be people tweeting how could this happen? if they score if it's not a shutout, I think there's going to be a little bit of overreaction. Like defense you know how it is. Oh, the defense gave up that one long drive in second quarter, and it's it's 35-7. The defense better get its act together. I'm just, because Ohio State fans haven't seen the Scarlet and Gray out on the field for so long. It's like, that one drive that's going to keep Ryan Day up at night. That one drive that's going to keep Jim Knowles wondering where it went wrong, even though you won, 56-7. I think that there's going to be a lot of both, Andy. So I like that you picked the Akron game for the overreaction on the positive direction, and then I'll take it for the negative direction, because I just think that this Akron game, because the opponent is who it is so ripe for the picking of overreacting on both ends of the spectrum. And I think we're going to get that out in full force after next Saturday. But I think that's the fun in it, right? Because we're going to stand on the field right after the game and certainly overreact to it all.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the Youngstown State game last year, they won 35-7, and it's like they lost, because they scored all those points in the second quarter and what after that, and it felt like the breakout game last year was the Western Kentucky game when they scored 62 or 63 points. And, the Youngstown State game, you would have expected them to score that many as well. So, yeah, I agree with you. If they only scored 35, it's like a 35-10 win or something. Definitely be eyebrow raising, across Ohio Stadium for sure. But, I think what's interesting, though, is I just don't think that offense will have the clunkiness of last year's offense. But I guess that's just yet to be seen. I will say, going back to my Michigan State pick, maybe it'll be kind of like, if it did play out that way, feel a little bit like the Rutgers game, where, Rutgers scored a fair amount in that game, 2-3 touchdowns, and made it interesting. They were winning in the third quarter. Before that, Jordan Hancock, 97-yard or 93-yard pick six. And, maybe a little similar to the Maryland game. There were some Big Ten games, now that I think about it and look back, that were, giving Ohio State a bit of a scare outside of the Michigan game. And I think if the Michigan State one falls into that category, it would be more like Rutgers and Maryland than anything else. But still think Ohio State would win. But they can win, and like you said, still have a negative overreaction from people. And again, maybe these aren't overreactions. Maybe these are honestly fair assessments. Because look at the Youngstown State, you score 35 points and you win that game, and people were kind of freaking out a little bit, and maybe justifiably so, given the course of the rest of the season and what we didn't see from the offense. So maybe not even so much an overreaction, maybe just the right time or maybe a time to press the panic button a little bit and get some critical, constructive analysis of the program.
Yeah, there were times last year where I was wrong, right? I just flat out was wrong, and I'll admit it. I don't, I've got enough pride to admit when I'm wrong. After the Notre Dame game, a lot of people were panicking about the offense. And I said, no, this was two ridiculously good defenses, and they were going at it. It was like, no, the offense had opportunities to score more, and it should have. And I kind of brushed that off, and I shouldn't have, because that should have sent some alarm bells. Ohio State should have scored more than it did on Notre Dame. And I think the same could be said for Notre Dame, to be honest. But, there were people who were telling me, hey, you need to look at this Ohio State team a little more closely on this offensive side. No, it's going to be fine. They're going to get their act together. Then I'm looking at the schedule right now, the Rutgers game, like you said, Rutgers ran the ball pretty well on Ohio State. And Kyle Monangai is a great running back. But I kind of was like, Ohio State, it's fine. They won the game. It was on the road. It was a weird environment. It's okay. And then there were times in the second half against Michigan where they couldn't get a stop. And it looked a lot like what the Rutgers game looked like at times, where they just could not get off the field. So, and then some special teams blunders early in the year, I kind of brushed those off, and then they come back to haunt Ohio State time and time again last year. Hopefully they don't have those issues. So I get it. I really do. I think that, and Michigan State's got some talent. It's not like they're not any good. I like Aiden Childs. I like some of the pieces that they brought in. It's all new, but that doesn't mean that it can't be successful. Andy, this is my favorite part. We have to exclude one massive piece of the equation. I'm sorry, folks. We're not just going to sit here and talk for 20 minutes about Jeremiah Smith, because we could if we wanted to, and maybe we will at some point. Maybe next week we'll do a Jeremiah Smith show as his debut arrives. But if there's a breakout freshman in September that you see, that's not Jeremiah Smith, because guys, he's going to break out in September. I'd put the house on it that he's going to break out in September. So who's a player, Andy, that you think from this freshman class that's going to catch your eye, break out, steal the show, I guess, and it can't be number 4 for the offense.
Yeah, I've got two I really want to pick, but I'll save one for you. I'll go with James Peoples just because, he's going to play a lot in the beginning of the season. He might play a lot throughout this season, given the wear and tear running backs have. They want to save Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, make sure that they're ready to go when the season matters most. And I think we're going to see a lot of James Peoples as well as Sam Williams-Dixon, those two true freshman running backs. They round out that scholarship group. And I think James Peoples is probably RB3 right now, just given how college ready he looked as soon as he entered the building. And Sam Williams-Dixon, I think, is really intriguing as kind of a two-way back that can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. But James Peoples can play some bully ball. He's tough. He's a hard runner. He runs low to the ground. He's also pretty quick too. And if you told me he had like 5 touchdowns by the end of September, I would not really bat an eye just because of the opponents they're playing and the blowouts they might be in and the amount of time he might play in the second half of these games. So I think everyone will know, as our colleague says, Tim May, the people's choice for this pick is James Peoples, because I think he will have a really good September and everyone will know his name. And, Dallin Hayden had a good freshman year for other reasons, right? Because the injury bug bit Ohio State really quickly in that running back room in 2022, and Dallin Hayden had to play. This, I think, will be a little bit different. He needs to play as James Peoples right away because they don't have that depth that they had the last couple of years for the running back room. So James Peoples is my pick, and I think he's going to be a little bit of a star, at least a freshman star, right away.
Andy, I think we need to do 2 rounds because I have 3 that I really want to talk about. So maybe if I pick one and just know telepathically who you're going to pick as your second one, since you just wrote like 10,000 words about one of these true freshmen, then I'll get to pick my second choice because you'll take one of my 3 that I'm not going to take first. Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Fair
Sweet.
enough.
Sounds great. I'm going to take Jalen McLean, gaining just a ton of buzz. He's a guy who wasn't the highest rated guy coming out of New Jersey. Ohio State found him. I was told by multiple people that, yes, the loss of KJ Bolden at the 5-star safety who ended up at Georgia stung for Ohio State, but they were pretty confident in the safety group that they had coming in. And, you kind of brush those kind of comments off. It's like, it sounds a little bit like, sour grapes or whatever. Trying to, CYA for losing out on KJ Bolden. But the bottom line is, like, now we're here in camp, and Jalen McLean is a guy who they're talking about counting on for depth because he looks like such an explosive athlete, such a great instinctual player in the secondary. He's going to play on special teams. You're going to see him make tackles on special teams. I said he's one of the most contact driven players that I've seen come into Ohio State right away. Like, he just wants, he absorbs contact. He wants the contact. And you don't see that a lot of times with freshmen. They obviously trust their pads. They've made it to Ohio State. But, like, contact at Ohio State is different than contact at a New Jersey prep school. He's come in and, like, shown that he is not afraid to get his nose dirty. He is going to play tough physical football in the secondary. I really like what he brings to the special teams because I think he's fast enough to play on special teams and he's physical enough. But then, if you're beating Akron 42-3 in the second quarter, that's a guy who can get out there early in the game, not just in the fourth quarter of a blowout when the horseshoe's 3/4 empty. Like, I'm going to go with Jalen McLean as my first round pick for breakout freshman. Then I'll hand it over to you because I think I know where you're going to go with this next one.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about Jalen McLean is he had like 1 billion tackles in high school. So if you ever go back and watch his huddle tape from Seton Hall Prep, and he's from West Orange, New Jersey, you just see racking up tackle after tackle after tackle. And sometimes, look, guys are lower rated because maybe their team isn't as good. They don't have as many eyes on them. And I think Jalen McLean has far exceeded his ranking already. Of course, he's got to prove it on the field. But I think if he gets his hands on the ball, he's taking it the distance. We saw him have a pick in the spring game. And, I think he could have been gone, honestly.
Yeah.
But they blew it dead. And I believe he picked off Julian Sayin, which leads me to my pick from the spring game. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. Julian Sayin, I think, is my second breakout freshman for this round.
That was a good transition, Andy. That was a good transition.
Almost fumbled it. I don't think Julian Sayin will, though, when he's on the field. I think, look, this guy is pretty impressive. I'm not saying that he's going to win the starting job at any point this year. That being said, I wouldn't rule it out either, just because I think this is one of those guys you see come through the building, and he's just different the way he throws the football. I think Will Howard definitely is got the command of this offense, and I think it's been really cool to watch his growth over the last month of August in training camp, see how much the guys trust him, and it's his job. And he will have this job as long as he deserves it and keeps playing well, and he could win a national championship with this Ohio State team. But if something goes awry this season, or if there's an injury, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Julian Sayin coming off the bench to play, and maybe not Devin Brown. If it's in game, I think it's Devin Brown. But if you have a week to prepare, maybe it's Julian Sayin, because I think the way the ball comes off his hand is just super impressive. It feels like a little bit when we used to watch CJ Stroud in practice. Everything is effortless. It's relaxing. It's easy. It's entertaining. It's just different. And I think when you watch those quarterbacks, whether it's at Ohio State or other programs that we've seen play Ohio State, you kind of just know when it's a little bit different. And maybe it's not in 2024, maybe it'll be in 2025. But I think the Julian Sayin train is already moving, and we're going to get to see it in action because, again, I think they're going to be leading in these games by 20, 30 points. And they're going to play both Devin Brown and Julian Sayin, and maybe that quarterback two competition bleeds into the season, and it's not going to be everything that people are talking about, but it's really important because not only does it dictate who's quarterback two for a potentially 16, 17 game season where you need a guy ready to step up, especially because they're going to run the quarterback more and injuries could be more likely at the position, but also it could be a telltale sign for 2025. And, if Devin Brown wants to stick around again, he's really got to compete right now with Julian Sayin to give himself the leg up if he wants to be the starter in 2025. So Julian Sayin, for me, I think he's going to hit the ground running, and I'm just excited to watch it.
I think the fun thing about that is you're going to want your freshman quarterback to get some real game action, right? You want to see him in some adverse situations. You want to see him do some things. I don't know if you're handing the ball off 20 times in the third quarter and fourth quarter if Julian Sayin's the quarterback out there. I think you're going to want to chuck it around a little bit, give him some experience, get him, get his feet wet his beak a little on like getting the full, opportunity to run an offense and not just be on the field on offense. So I love that. I think he's got all the tools. We've talked about him a lot. And you wrote a great story about him on lettermenrow.com. And I can't believe you didn't plug that story. I mean, when you work that hard on something, you got to plug it. If you haven't read Andy's free story on lettermenrow.com about Julian Sayin, go do it. You'll learn a ton about who he is as a person, how he processes information, why Ohio State's so high on him. Just a great job, Andy. So kudos to you on that. Everybody, if you haven't read that, go read it at lettermenrow.com. Maybe I'll put the story in the description of the video just to give people a reason to go to the description and click on it. Man, this is so tough. I want to go with Peyton Pierce because I think he's a linebacker on the rise, a freshman, but I can't do it. I want to go Nick McLarty. I gave him a nickname that I'm workshopping. I'm not going to reveal it yet. If he wins the starting punter job, I'm definitely going to reveal it though. I think it's really good. It's actually like super bad because it's like pretty punny, and there's some people who just hate that, but I think it's great. But I can't because how in the world are you going to not pick Little Garrett? And that might be disparaging to Mylan Graham, calling him little and then something. But, man, you see the number 5 out there. You see a skinny slot receiver standing out there on the field, catching everything that comes his way, shaking defenders out of their boots and getting open, getting in the open field, the way he catches the ball, the way he moves out of his routes, the way he doesn't move his head when he's doing anything, the way he's kind of fearlessly attacking his first training camp. Like Mylan Graham reminds me of Garrett Wilson, and it's probably unfair because Garrett Wilson is like a top 10 receiver in the NFL right now, but I'm talking about freshman Garrett Wilson, not NFL Garrett Wilson. Man, if Mylan Graham had been here in the spring, I think he would be in the conversation of like, hey, this is a 5-man rotation, full stop. Like, I think he would be at that level already. And the fact that he lost his black stripe on Wednesday evening, the fact that he is pushing for playing time, the fact that he's getting praise from Ryan Day ahead of some of the veterans on this roster, of who could be garnering that praise, the fact that he's doing everything he's been asked. Ohio State recognizes that stuff. And when you get a chance to put a young guy in and you've got a 17-game schedule, you're going to want to get these young guys in a little more early and a little more often than you have in the past. I know Ohio State fans have complained that they don't play the young guys quick enough in some of these blowouts. I think you're going to see that because I really like what they're doing with Milan Graham. And again, it's unfair, completely unfair. But man, he just does some things that remind you of another number 5 that walked into the building and was a superstar in year 1. I'm not saying he's going to be a superstar. He's got a long way to go. But I think you're going to see some of what that tantalizing 5-star talent from Fort Wayne. I think you're going to see that in September.
Do you think if he was wearing like 81, people would have the same comparisons? No. I think that's so funny. But I agree with you. I mean, like, it's so natural to make that connection. I also think it's worth noting that when he was at June camps for the recruiting camps at Ohio State last summer, he did say that he does see some, Garrett Wilson in himself. And of course, he wasn't trying to compare himself saying he's Garrett Wilson right now, but someone he wants to be in this offense. And I think that there is a little more that I can maybe just the number. And it's as funny as it is to joke about. So, and I remember Carnell Tate saying, Milan Graham just has the wiggle, and, they're referring to him as a good route runner. And I talked to Brandon Innes about it. I was like, so is route running just something that's innate? Like, some guys just have it, or how much of it is it that you work on the craft and can really catch up to the guys who maybe just have it? And he was like, well, sometimes it's you just have it or you don't. And Milan Graham's one of those guys that just has it. So they clearly see what he has. And this isn't just us blowing smoke about someone that was a highly touted prospect. He's already proven so far, it seems like, especially in the back half of camp, that he's someone worthy of snaps, meaningful snaps, right away in this season. And unlike Brandon Innes, who also came in late, he doesn't have to deal with maybe as loaded and as experienced of a wide receiver crew as there is this year, where it feels like there's more opportunities from spots 5 to 7 to step up. And maybe by the end of the season, Milan Graham is number 5.
I'm just dreaming of that 2025 receiving core with potential of Julian Sand throwing the football to Jeremiah Smith, Milan Graham, Brandon Innes, and Carnell Tate. That's 2 slot receivers and 2 outside receivers right there. And like 4 receiver sets with Julian Sand's live arm. Oh my gosh, I'm dreaming of it. Andy, you know what else I'm dreaming of? Wendy's saucy nugs. I've already talked about them, but I got to talk about them again because you've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? We've got Ohio State covered. Wendy's has the nugs covered. Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them up, not just to 10, to 11. Speaking of Brandon Innes, choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm. If you, Andy, I know you're a heat seeker. We tried some salsa at a farmer's market the other day. You're a real heat seeker. I know you are. Try that spicy ghost pepper, Andy, only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. Spicy ghost pepper on the spicy nugs. Whew. That's heat that I can't handle. I dare you to try it, Andy. I do. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. I know you love those nugs, Andy. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's at participating U.S. Wendy's locations. I'm just dreaming of like the nugs, first of all, but also like that receiving core in 25 is going to do. It's going to be like the Lord's work. I think it's going to be so fun to watch, and you're going to get a glimpse of that in September, which takes us into our next category, one of our last categories, sadly. Andy, I want a breakout player in September. You get the whole dadgum roster to pick from because you get to go first. Let's go non-freshman because we just did freshmen, and I think we took the most likely candidates to actually play football for Ohio State this year. But if you have a breakout player in September, I'm not talking about the superstars, the guys who could have went to the NFL last year, the guys who and love already. We don't even have to write senior cornerback because everybody knows who Denzel Burke is, but like a guy that is just going to break out that we haven't been talking about as much this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, we have been talking about him, but I think I still need to pick him because if I didn't, people would be like, why aren't you guys mentioning him? Carnell Tate, because I think from the national media perspective, there's just not enough about Carnell Tate right now. It's all Jeremiah Smith, and for good reason. It's all Emeka Egbuka, and for good reason. But I don't see as much on Carnell Tate, and Carnell Tate was actually a lot better than average as a freshman within the Ohio State standards. He probably would have put up, 600, 700, 800, maybe 900 receiving yards as a freshman anywhere else. And it's just the fact that Ohio State really takes its time with its wide receivers. Maybe Jeremiah Smith is actually probably the exception to the rule. But I think Carnell Tate will break out in year 2. I think that's not even something that I'm worried about going on record for. I think I'm very confident saying you'll have 1,000 yards. I don't really think that's a question for me. It's more of, how many just head-turning games will he have? Is he going to have a Jackson Smith and Jigba game? I don't know if anyone will ever have a game like JSN had in the Rose Bowl, but is he going to have those takeover games we saw from Marvin Harrison Jr., that we've already seen from Mecca Buka, that we've seen in the past from Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson? Is Carnell Tate going to get to that level? I think he will this year. And I think everyone will know his name, not just in Columbus, but throughout all of college football. I think this is Carnell Tate's time. He's so confident, and he should be, because he did play well last year, well enough to get meaningful snaps in a very crowded wide receiver room. I think this is his time to take the ball and run with it.
Yeah, I'm just telling you, if Carnell gets to a point where he has 1,000 yards receiving this year, it's not out of the question because of the freshman year that he had. He had 264 yards receiving last year. If he has 1,000 yards, if let's say he has 1,200 yards receiving, he'll be at 1,400 receiving yards for his career, or 1,500, or whatever it rounds up to. The all-time receiving record is 2,898 yards. Like it won't be out of the question where you could have Emeka Egbuka break the all-time receiving yards record at Ohio State this year, and then Carnell Tate turn around and potentially 1 or 2 more years after this year and break it again. Because look, if you have a good freshman year and you're in this Ohio State offense, you set yourself up to potentially start getting up into that record category, because for so long Ohio State didn't have that crazy multiple 1,000-yard receivers. You know what I mean? Like it's just one of those things where like it's something to talk about. If Carnell Tate has 1,000 yards this year, you have to start considering him up in that record book, because not even Marvin Harrison Jr. was able to do it. He had 2,600, but he didn't have a lot in his freshman year, like at all. And so if he had 150 more yards in his freshman year, he would have been pushing for that record from Michael Jenkins. I think Emeka's going to break it this year, but I love the Carnell Tate pick, because like you're going to see a guy who's going to enter his junior year as one of the best receivers in college football, if not the second best, just because of Jeremiah Smith. So
yeah. Jeremiah Smith's going to break that record again. That's the thing.
Yes.
If Carnell breaks it, then yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like the records could really start to fall here, because the freshman receivers are getting better and better. And like Carnell set himself up nicely with 264 yards. Well, then if Jeremiah Smith sets himself up with 800 receiving yards this year, and then he goes back-to-back 1,000 yards, like guess what? He's going to be number 2 all-time in receiving yards. He's going to be number 1 all-time in receiving yards. Like we're talking about something that's got the potential to get a little out of control here, but in a good way. Now you're making me pick mine. Should we do a draft? Should we do 2 again like we did with freshmen?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, well, I mean, I am making the rules, I guess.
Yeah,
I'm going to go Tegra. I'm going to go Tegra Shabola, because I think he's going to start at right guard. And, like, you want a massive individual who's just going to move people in the run game. I think there may be, and this might concern Ohio State fans, but that's fine. I could see a world where there's a couple growing pains in pass blocking with Tegra. But, like, you want a guard who is just going to move bodies on the interior. I think Tegra Shabola is going to be able to do that. I think it's his time. He's really started to solidify himself as a good candidate to play right guard. Chip Kelly loves how much bigger he is than most guards around the country. He's just a massive individual, and I think that means great things for Ohio State. So I don't need to be long-winded here. I think he's going to be incredible in run blocking. I think as the season progresses, he's going to get better in pass blocking. The good news is you've got a mobile quarterback that can probably withstand a little bit of pressure if it gets a little leaky there in the first half of the season. And then you've got 2 bye weeks in the first 8 weeks of the year where you can teach some tape and show him what he's doing wrong to continue to help him progress. I think he'll be ready to go by that Oregon game. But there may be some growing pains here in the early slate, even against a poor schedule. But I think if I'm picking a breakout guy in September, because if you win the right guard job, you're automatically a breakout because you're going to start for this loaded roster. And so I'm going to go with Tegra.
Yeah, it's a good pick. I mean, this whole offensive line needs to break out, really, right? They need to have a bounce back year. and you're only as strong as your weakest link. And I'm not saying Taylor Chipola will be if he starts at right guard, but he will be the most inexperienced of the bunch if he is the starter at right guard. He needs to be strong for this entire group to bounce back and to have a breakout year, because they need that with a Chip Kelly offense, with that wrinkle, probably some more physicality. We've been getting that sense really the last couple of weeks talking to all the players. The O-line is just tougher. And I know that's cliche and I know that's just a word, but I think we've seen it a little bit. Of course, you see the Iron Buckeye list, and 3 of them are offensive linemen. Of course, you see these one-on-one pass rush reps against the offensive linemen and them holding up better than we've seen in year past. So this isn't just all talk. We've seen the way they worked on their bodies, but also the way they're performing against this defensive line, which everyone believes, and seeing the proof is in the pudding. So I do think there's something to that potential breakout for the offensive line. My second pick is definitely going to be Davison Igbinosun. I think he might be the most confident player on this team. I mean, look, it's honestly fun to watch. And it's fun to watch. And he's someone that, when he's out there at practice, you hear him and you feel him, and that's what you just hear from the players, but also just watching, you can see it play out. His battles with Jeremiah Smith are better than cable. They're better than any streaming service. It's less expensive than Peacock, I guess. I mean, I don't know if you had to pay the $50 to watch practice. I don't know the math there, but it is worth watching. And it's a shame we don't get to see it in game, but it's also a blessing for Ohio State fans that they're on the same team. Because Davison Igbinosun is just that good. And I think he might have the highest ceiling of all these corners, which sounds a little weird because we hear a lot about Denzel Burke, and I think Denzel Burke is great and definitely has that ceiling of a fringe first round, second round guy. He wants to be, cornerback 1. We'll see where he ends up. But Davison Igbinosun maybe could go higher in the draft. I don't think that's crazy to say. He was targeted 71 times last year, which leads you to believe, okay, well, they're shying away from Denzel Burke, but teams really didn't have a ton of success throwing Davison Igbinosun's way. Yes, he gave up 5 touchdowns. Yes, he had a handful of those DPI and holding penalties, but for the amount of times he was targeted, he really didn't give up that many receptions. It was around that 50% mark for his reception percentage allowed, according to Pro Football Focus. Those are really good numbers for a cornerback that's being attacked like that as much as he has. And he's really physical and a great run defender. So I would not be surprised if he becomes a household name this year, whether it's because the pass breakups, maybe he has a couple interceptions, or just because he's a really good run defender, makes some loud plays, behind the backfield. But look, I think he's so fun to watch, and the closer you can get to the field, the more you kind of understand that, because you hear him and you see him talking and you see him not shying away from anything.
I love that. I think he's such a pivotal piece that doesn't get talked about enough, because and rightfully so, to be honest, because Denzel Burke is so good. You can't not talk about him. Jordan Hancock is, I think, the most underrated player on the defensive side in college football, because when he started playing nickel full-time for Ohio State, it changed the Ohio State defense. The Ohio State defense went from 8 to 10 when Jordan Hancock started playing at a high level. So, yeah, it's one of those things where he's not talked about enough, but you also understand why he's not talked about enough, because everyone else is so darn good.
Right.
Which makes it hard for me to find defensive guys. I really want to go, especially because we're doing breakout player in September here. I really want to go with Mitchell Melton, because I think he's going to have a really good year. The mindset is there, but I've got to slide into the interior. I'm staying in the trenches, because where are football games won? In the trenches. Man, I all offseason I talked about Jason Moore, and I talked about Jason Moore, and I talked about Jason Moore, and his classmate was right there, and I kept talking about Jason Moore. And I think Jason's going to have a good year. I think he's going to play quite a bit for Ohio State as one of these depth pieces on the interior. But when Jim Knowles brings up unprovoked Caden McDonald twice in the last 3 weeks, and then you talk to other people about him, and they start to talk, you hear the buzz surrounding Caden McDonald. It's just different. And that is not to be ignored. And so they've left me no choice, Andy. I have to take Caden McDonald, because he's going to play a lot. He may very well be the 3rd defensive lineman on the field. I think he only plays nose tackle, so that might put Hero Canoe in an opportunity to play both 3-tech and nose tackle, so he might be the third on the field, but that's just because of semantics and in the way that he can play both, where Caden McDonald can only play one. But I think Caden McDonald's going to be really disruptive from the nose tackle position. He's got great bursts for his size. He moves really well. Tyleek Williams calls him Little Bro because they kind of move the same at their size. And so I think that's worth noting. We saw Tyleek flash as a true freshman in that Tulsa game where Travion Henderson had 270 yards. It kind of overshadowed the way Tyleek played. But I could see an early September multi-sack performance, great tackle for loss game from Caden McDonald against one of these MAC opponents to set the tone for what this backup defensive line could be for the rest of the year. So I'm going to go Caden McDonald.
And he can play fullback, apparently, because we saw that in the Cotton Bowl, which no one really remembers, but he can do that as well. So, yeah, I think they really like him. We talked about this on our video on Wednesday, I believe, or Thursday, just about Caden McDonald, got to play right away. And when you're a summer arrival and you don't enroll early and you make that kind of impact and you are getting on the field, especially midseason, back half of the year, that shows a lot about what the coaches think about a player and their long-term future, in my opinion, of trying to get those reps in and not really worrying about the redshirt situation, but making sure they get those reps so that in year 2, they can be a potential breakout player. So I think that's a good pick.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Andy. All right, last question. Then we're going to pick some of these week 0 games just because I can't help myself. I got to do it. So we're going to take one more. We're going to do one more question. Then we're going to go to week 0 games. Andy, my question is, what question do you want answered by the end of September? We'll just go by the end of September. It was going to be by the first bye week, but that's only 2 games. And I don't know if we're going to know anything by the end of the Akron game and the Western Michigan game, other than like, hey, this team's pretty good. So when they get back from the trip to East Lansing, they're getting ready for Iowa. What's one thing that we have to have answered that makes you ready for the Iowa game, ready for that trip to Eugene, and then ready for the second bye week?
I don't know if this has to be answered.
We got 2 more. I completely skipped over one of my favorite questions. Wow, what an idiot I am. But we'll stick with this one first.
Well, you're not an idiot, but you did skip over one. But anyway, I will say, look, this is not something I need to have answered, but I want to have answered. Is Will Howard a Heisman Trophy contender? And look, you will not learn everything in the first month of the season, but I think after the first month of last season, we could all confidently say Kyle McCord is probably not in that conversation for the Heisman Trophy. Now, we were still waiting to see if he could be a really good starting quarterback at Ohio State. We were still waiting to see if he could win the national championship. But I don't think anyone after the first month of the season was like, yeah, he's in the Heisman conversation, right? Yeah. I think you can know that pretty easily. Early in the season, is Will Howard putting up ridiculous video game numbers when he should be, against Akron, against Western Michigan, against Marshall, even against Michigan State, who probably will still have a really bad defense, even though I'm excited to see what they do offensively. I think their defense is still going to be really bad. So, is Will Howard going to put up those monster numbers? Is he going to be a guy who is still in the Heisman Trophy conversation? Every time you're the Ohio State starting quarterback under Ryan Day, you will at least be put in that category at the beginning of the season. Kyle McCord was, and every quarterback going forward until this trend really, until it falls off, it's going to be that way. So Will Howard is right now. Will he be at the end of the month of September? That's my question. I want answered. I don't know if we need to have that answered. They can still win a national championship if he isn't. I don't think that's necessary, but I'm curious because he came here to be a first or second round draft pick with all the weapons he has around him. Going into the Iowa game, the Oregon game, you want to be really confident in Will Howard. Is he that guy? Is he a guy that can be in New York City? I'm curious about that.
Are you basically saying you want to know will himself into Heisman contention?
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay. Nailed it. Crushed it. All right. Perfect. My big question is this tight end group good enough? Plain and simple. You brought in an Ohio transfer. As a proud Bobcat, my degree is right there up on my wall. I believe in Will Kaczmarek, but that's not the reason that I believe in him, just because we went to the same college for undergrad. But he played really well at a MAC level. Good blocking tight end, capable receiver. Keenan Bailey thinks that he's got him playing really well at wide receiver as a receiving threat. I heard from a reliable source that Will Kaczmarek was, quote, crushing it and killing it this preseason. So like he may play the most snaps for this Ohio State tight end group. And he was playing as the backup tight end in the MAC last year. Is he good enough? Like I want that answered by the time we get to the Iowa game, because he's going to have to block really well against Iowa for them to run the ball, because Iowa's defense is really good. Is Bennett Christian another guy who's a good enough blocking threat? He was talking about being the most physical guy on the roster. He was trying to will this tight end group to be the most physical group on the team. He has a really good attitude. Does that translate into good blocking on the field? Can G. Scott finally take the step to be the guy at tight end and lead this unit like he does in the locker room, but do it on the field? I need to see that from him. And then can Jelani Thurman put it all together and become the receiving threat that we all know he can be and maybe could love that he could be? Like, I just want to know. I don't have a lot of questions about this roster. You took I'm confident in the offensive line because I've been confident in the offensive line since March. You know me. I've been very optimistic about this offensive line, the 2024 group. I've been really optimistic about this defense because there's literally no reason not to be. I don't have any other questions. The receiving group is good. The running back group, it's good. If I don't have questions on the offensive line and you already stole Will Howard, well, that leaves me with one thing. So I just want to know if the tight ends are good enough, because Ohio State fans love to hate the tight ends because they want to see 4 receivers on the field because Brian Hartline recruits all the 5-stars. But the tight ends are so important, especially in Chip Kelly's offense. I want to know if they're good enough.
Yeah, I want to see 13 personnel, 12 personnel. But you know what? If we do see those packages like 13 or 14, that shows that they are good enough in the eyes of Chip Kelly and Keenan Bailey. They wouldn't be putting out that many tight ends if they weren't deserving to play or if they didn't think they were reaching the standard. So I am a little bit less confident on the offensive line. Like I do like what we've seen this offseason. I still want to see it first before I crown the achievement of this offseason. Not that you're doing that, but I do think you're more confident than me on the offensive line, which is fine. I just want to see it more. I want to see how dominant they can be. Again, that's going to be the barometer, is because they should dominate these MAC schools. They should beat up on Marshall. They should even beat up on Michigan State. So I want to see those first 4 games and see how dominant they can be. And if there are, those things that we saw last year with Josh Simmons, like, does he fix the procedural penalties? Is he the guy that we saw through most of the back half of the season? Is Donovan Jackson eventually going to be, the All-American we think he can be? Is Seth McLaughlin as consistent? Are there snap problems way out of the way? Like, there are some things I still want to see in game that I just feel like I need to see first. But I agree that it's been impressive this offseason. I think that we definitely feel better about the offensive line than we did at this point last year. That's
fair. I completely understand why somebody would not be as optimistic. Maybe I'm just an eternal optimist, Andy. I don't know. Maybe I'm optimistic to a fault.
No, I mean, I think there's like legitimate hope for that group. I think last year it was a lot of questions, and now I think that there's like a lot that you can base off of that hope. You just, who knows? We'll see.
Last year it was definitely blind hope.
Yeah.
They at least started to see the light last year. I think there's light at the end of this tunnel, and it's not a moving train. I think it's real light. I think this unit is going to be road graders. I do have some small concerns about pass blocking, but I think a 235-pound quarterback who can move kind of alleviates some pass blocking concerns that I have. So not that he needs to be Superman, but that's where the optimism on the offensive line comes from, is mobile quarterback, good run game. I think your offensive line is going to be okay. Last question, since I lied, I'm a liar. Maybe not an idiot, not a complete liar, but a little bit of a liar. So we have one more. And then I'm going to also ask you for picks for week 0. Andy, now we're going not just September. We're going full slate, full schedule. Is there any game on this schedule? I thought we were going to have the schedule to throw up on the screen. I don't have it. I'm going to get it for the future. I'm sorry. The sneakiest tough game on this schedule. Do you got one? Is it the Iowa game? Is it that trip to your alma mater, back to Northwestern?
Kind of. Wrigley. It could, I was really tempted to pick that game, but it's not as fun. Although I don't want to take yours. So like, if you have the game that I'm going to talk about, then I will talk about the Northwestern game. But the Nebraska game is just so juicy to me. Like, look, Nebraska could be 7-0, undefeated, which is crazy because that schedule. Look, they play, I believe it's UTEP, Colorado, Northern Iowa, Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, and Indiana. Like, they could win every single one of those games. Dylan Raiola, who originally committed to Ohio State, then was committed to Georgia, gets a chance to go to Columbus. He's the starting quarterback as a true freshman at Nebraska and could potentially be 7-0. Again, this could all blow up in flames. They could not be 7-0. They could be 3-4. Who knows? But if they're 7-0, you bet they're going to be ranked, and they're going to come into Ohio Stadium and play this Ohio State team. And I think that will be a quite juicy matchup for everyone watching. So that sneaky is, I don't know if it'll be a tough game, but it's going to be an exciting matchup potentially that I don't think anyone looks at the schedule now and it's like, oh yeah, like that's definitely one I got to circle. You know, there's 7 other home games that you could say, well, maybe I'll just go to that one instead. Well, I don't know. Nebraska, Ohio State could be interesting.
I got 2. The Nebraska game is the obvious one, right? So I'm glad that you talked about it because I was going to talk about it, but I also don't care that you did talk about it. I think there's going to be more Ohio State fans at Northwestern than Northwestern fans at Northwestern because of the Wrigley Field thing. Like, Ohio State fans will want that. They don't get that opportunity often. Like, you know, they're never going to the Pinstripe Bowl. So we're not going to see them in Yankee Stadium. The Fenway Bowl, does that even still exist? So
Yeah.
like, Ohio State playing in a baseball stadium just doesn't happen. So I think Ohio State fans and being in the Midwest and understanding the history of Wrigley Field, because there's a lot of baseball fans in the Ohio State community, like, I think they're going to pack Wrigley for that. And I think Northwestern fans are going to get shut out of that game by and large. Like, Ohio State fans will want to travel. And look, man, I'm a Midwesterner at heart. We love a good weekend trip to Chicago. There is nothing Midwesterners love more than a good weekend in Chicago. So, like, I think Ohio State fan. I don't have concerns about that game because I think it's going to be Ohio Stadium light. I'm going to go with the weirdest game that you never see coming. I'm going with the Indiana game. I just think that, look, man, I don't think Indiana is going to be any good. I think former Ohio quarterback Curtis Rourke from the Rourke quarterback dynasty, he may not be healthy in that game because he's gone through a lot of health concerns. So expecting him to be healthy for game 11 has me concerned for the Hoosiers. But it's the week before the Michigan game. And, like, I don't think it's going to be tough on the field. But, like, we all know when we get to that game, because we do it every single year. You get to that game, you get into that stadium, you're on the field pregame, you're talking to coaches, you're talking to some players, and it just seems like kind of tense because they all want it to get to, if it's a noon game, they just want it to get to 4:00, man. They just want it to be rivalry week. And they just, if it's a 3:30 game, they just want to get to sleep that night so they can wake up the next morning and it be rivalry week. And there's just something about the week before rivalry week that never sits well with me. And so I don't think that this Indiana team is any good. But I also think that Kirk Cignetti will have them, like, ready to play in that game. And I think that Ohio State may not be the most mentally sharp team in the country for that week because they're getting ready for Michigan.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, last year they played Minnesota the week before Michigan, and it felt like the first half they were a little slow, maybe a little sleepy, and then the second half, boom, blitzed. Pretty much, I think, scored 3 touchdowns right away. It was, or maybe 2 right away. It was a crazy breakout to the first minute of the second half. And, eventually they got things right. But
one of my favorite moments of the year last year came in that Minnesota game. JT picking up a fumble, and instead of blocking for him, Jordan Hancock tried to get him to hand it off to him to score a touchdown. Yeah. And so JT didn't get to score because Jordan wouldn't throw a block for him. It was so funny.
Wasn't it also the game where, like, they did the excessive celebration, or they're called for a celebration because they posed in the end zone and, like, 8 different players were penalized?
It was either that one or the Michigan State game. Those 2 games kind of ran together for me because they were both home blowouts.
But again, that's getting to the point. That's at home, right? And, they're also playing Indiana at home. And I think that you're a little bit less exposed to the Michigan game head trip if you're at home than if you're on the road. Like, we saw Maryland game 2022. That was a scare for Ohio State. You're on the road. Maybe you get a little sleepy making that trip, wherever you're going. But I do like that Ohio State is at home for that game against Indiana. And Indiana has some depth concerns. Like, they'll be fine with the 22 they put out there to start the season. But, like, this is a late season game. There are going to be some injuries. I don't know on the offensive and defensive line where they're going to be at. That's why I'm not as scared about that game. For other reasons, there are too with the talent gap. But I'd look, dismiss the Northwestern game all you want. I don't think the crowd has any impact on it. Northwestern never really has a great crowd, to be honest. They're going to be playing right next to a lake with like 20,000 people max, 15,000, I think, whatever it is. That's not really the concern for me with that game. It's the weather, man. Like the last time we saw Northwestern play Ohio State, that was a 21-7 game, and it was closer than the score suggests. And it was 40-mile-per-hour winds. There were ponchos swirling around. Our camera fell. You caught it. Like, there's a lot going on with Illinois, just that state at that time of the year. This is a mid-November game. If that game is interesting, it's because of the weather. And it's because, quite honestly, Northwestern's a pretty resilient team. Like, they play tough. So, that would be more for me where I was going with that game than the crowd. Yeah, you're right. Ohio State's definitely going to be outnumbering Northwestern people in the crowd of Wrigley Field. There's no doubt. But you never know with the weather. It can get weird, especially in a baseball stadium where there isn't as good traction. I covered the Pinstripe Bowl when Boston College played Iowa, and it was so cold that they couldn't wear cleats. They had to wear basketball shoes. So, like, you never really know. It gets goofy in baseball stadiums. I've also covered a game in Fenway Park. So Ohio State won't be there, but I've been there, and I can tell you it gets a little weird. So maybe that game will get interesting, but only because of the weather.
Let's get out of here, Andy. You got any picks? Florida State, Georgia Tech?
Florida State for sure. Although I don't think they're as dominant as they were last year. Like, I'm not picking Florida State I think they picked them to win it all last year. And you know what? They got snubbed, so maybe they would have. No, just kidding. But look, I think I've got Florida State in this game pretty handily.
Yeah, I think Florida State's going to win, but I'll take the points.
Okay.
I think it's 11.5, 10.5. Take the points. I think it's a 2-score game. Plus, like, it's in Ireland, man. Like, what are we doing? Tallahassee and Atlanta are too close to just ship those two teams to Ireland. I just don't get it. Like, you want to send like BC Notre Dame to Ireland?
That'd be great.
You want to send like I don't know, like even like Virginia Tech, Miami. You want to send them to Ireland? So be it. But like, it's just too weird. I don't like it. And next year they're shipping Iowa State, Kansas State to Ireland. What the hell are we doing?
Look, I mean, those games have been doing pretty well. Hey, outside of Navy, Notre Dame, that was a blowout.
Yeah. If they send Ohio State to Ireland, I'll do everything I can to be there. I mean, I would assume that I will be there. I just don't see Ohio State ever doing that. So,
yeah, I think it's weird to take any sort of like rivalry or any
conference game. I don't like conference games.
Weird. Yeah, I think non-con is the way to go for that for sure.
I think Georgia and Clemson should have had to go to Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, people would go.
I also would love to see LSU in Ireland. Give me all LSU fans just drinking like pints upon pints of Guinness before watching the Tigers.
Yeah.
Just give me that. I don't need to see Farmageddon next year in Ireland. I don't need Florida State doing the tomahawk chop in Ireland. I just don't need it. But I'll watch it. I mean, I'll definitely watch it. I'm going to be strapped in.
Yeah.
All right. That's our show. We're going to do this every Thursday, 6:30. Make sure you're
not picking Delaware State, Hawaii?
Give me the Bows. Look, man, I went to Hawaii 2 years or last summer. I fell in love with that place. I will never pick against Hawaii. Look, Hawaii could be playing the Chiefs, and I'm picking Hawaii because I love that place so much. So give me Hawaii.
All right. They score 40. They get 40 on Delaware State.
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
I think the Bows cover, whatever. Put the house on the Bows. That is not gambling advice.
Hey, you heard it, folks.
Every Thursday, 6:30, we're going to be right here on the Lettermen Row YouTube channel. Make sure you like this video. Subscribe for more. We cover the Buckeyes 365 days a year here on the YouTube channel and on lettermenrow.com. We win an hour 4. We're going to try to keep this thing tight right at an hour every single Thursday. It's Lettermen Live presented by Wendy's. Go get the new saucy nugs. You've had them dipped in sauce. Now you want them covered in sauce. The new saucy nugs at Wendy's. Make sure you do that. Make sure you go to lettermenrow.com. Get all of Andy and I's coverage. Tim made the 41-year vets over there. Alex Gleitman, Matt Parker, Mick Walker on the recruiting side. We're covering the Buckeyes every day here on the YouTube channel at lettermenrow.com. We'll see you guys over there.